So, first of all, I'd like to say that I will speak in the name of Pom here and myself as two mothers interested in parenting and education, as well as two French organizations defending the right to home educate. Les Enfants d'Abord, usually known as LEDA, which means kids first, and CESE, choose to educate one's child. There are about 30,000 children home educated in France. Home educated in France, among which about 18,000 are enrolled in CNED, the state official long-distance school. 3,000 are home educated without any further support or enrollment, and about 9,000 enrolled in other long-distance schools. Only the first group is not submitted to further controls unless they don't send their schoolwork back to the distance school regularly. From the beginning of compulsory schooling, home education has been authorized in France. However, legal texts about home education have changed several times since then. In 1998, regulations for home educated children became more strict, intending to prevent them from sectarian enrollment. Was supposed to. So declaring the situation of home education each year to the mayor as well as to National Education Authority became compulsory for the families. Moreover, a social control over the reasons for home educating has to be led by the mayor every 2 years, while an academic control over the education received by the children and organized by the National Education Authority has to take place at least once a year. However, this system didn't concern or apply to children enrolled in long-distance school. But in 2007, all the children, even when enrolled in long-distance schools, became subjected to the control by the mayor, which quickly led to the control by the National Education Authority too, because of, should I say, thanks to an unfortunate misunderstanding in the writing of the law. Then in 2009, a decree demands that at 16, each child should reach the common basic knowledge instead of the previous comparable level to that of a child in school. By now then, every child is supposed to learn and know the same things as if it were possible, and above all, as if it was the case for children in schools. All this takes place as a result of European and international guidelines that follow more and more economic trends to shape the educational system where the children are no longer at the center. Finally, in December of 2011, a new guideline was set up in order to interpret the law and help authorities to organize the regulations. For the first time, it mentions the word home educated instead of the previous compulsory schooling, reasserts the freedom in pedagogy, proposes that parents send a file explaining their method and general way to educate at home in order to adapt the assessments to the form of home education the child receives. Finally, it reasserts that regulations in France shouldn't be set up in comparison with school children's programs and levels. So at first sight, it seemed to be rather a good new guideline. In fact, it's still as difficult as ever to have national education authority admit that children can learn without a state standard progression, and controls are often disrespectful of a large amount of families, especially unschooling ones, who feel neither understood nor listened to. Children don't understand what they are expected to do, since they are used to learn what is meaningful for them at any given moment. Above all, they usually learn for themselves and not for teachers or anybody else. As for parents, they feel judged, incapable, and have to justify their educational choices over and over, while their children are perfectly well. Even if the control takes place only once a year, their whole lives and experiences are conditioned by what the controllers expect from them. It seems to them that they have more to fight for their freedom than to take advantage of their rights. Moreover, the pretended freedom accorded by the law and the guideline is limited by a new point in the letter. The inspector has the right to report back to the prosecutor any family who he feels is not collaborating in the assessments. And he doesn't even need to specify to the family in which points he thinks they are refusing to collaborate. That situation raises a serious problem for families concerned. The educational freedom allowed by the law in France often prevents the court to condemn the way children learn or their level of knowledge. So the critics against families tend to slip to the social ground of home education with judgment of their educational practice, even if it's not directly related to learning achievements, and that often lead families to be subjected to hard social measures. Actually, it's through children protection and children's rights that the state tries to force families into teaching their children according to the state school standards. Nonetheless, people keep fighting and engaging actions to protect their freedom. For example, both organizations, LEDA and CIS, appealed in the first instance against this new guideline, and then Leda went on with a contentious appeal, but has still received no answer about it. As for families themselves, for example, a group of families from south of France has decided not to accept anymore any regulation session organized by the authorities in their area until they've come to a satisfying agreement for both controlling and controlled people that the law be strictly respected. They managed to get a meeting that turned out not to be satisfying, since authorities gave a polite hearing but didn't intend to change anything significant as far as regulations and assessments were concerned. So family decided to go on with their refusal until they find a real agreement. So at a more global level, the French organizations have noticed for the last 2 years a rising of various French publications, articles, books, translations dealing with learning otherwise, and especially autonomous learning, which is new and very welcomed in France. A rising of families deschooling their children, basically and mainly because of children suffering at school, as well as the state system proving unable to answer the pressing demand that the pupils' curricula be adapted to every single child. The more there are, or we think so, the more there are home educating families, the less it seems possible to suppress this legal option. On the other hand, there are also a rising of families denounced to the prosecutor, even if the cases at the moment are mostly sorted out and don't even go to court. Some fantastic interpretations of the guideline, which is already an interpretation of the law, remember, and let's keep a bit of humor, according to the geographical area you're living in. And finally, which is less funny, a rising of problems between authorities and Muslim families. To conclude, we would say that the biggest issue in France remains that people in charge of regulations are not impartial, since they belong to the state system and are interested in saving it, of course. They seem unable to adapt the regulation and assessments to the educational choices of families, in particular with autonomous learners, but not only. It was important for us to share that at the European level, we are seeking of countries like Spain, where home educators wish they had a legislative text allowing them, at last, to home educate legally, but do know that it probably couldn't go without regulations. In our opinion, it's essential to get a regulation board or commission or whatever, which would be independent from the national education authorities, even if we are conscious that no control at all would be the best.
¿Hay alguna pregunta? Bueno, entonces Después de esta exposición en la que vemos cómo, incluso en los países en los que el homeschooling es legal, está creciendo de forma alarmante esa necesidad de control por parte de los burócratas que están muy asustados de la libertad de los ciudadanos. Quiero pasar la palabra...
¿Puedo hacer una pregunta yo a Brigitte? Brigitte, I would like to ask you, this is very interesting what you just said, but I can't really I can't put it in the real world. What did you suggest as an independent board of education, independent from the politicians and from the bureaucrats, and how would you establish that? Because if it's established by, let's say, organizations like ALE and so on, it's a totally independent thing, but with no power at all whatsoever. So how would you implement that measure? I mean, it's really smart, but it's kind of very hard to achieve.
I think I will be less fluent with my paper. I think independent, I suppose it would be impossible not to have people from national education in that board. But it may be interesting to not have only people from educational system. Maybe some people involved in children development, new pedagogies, or parents who have homeschooled their children for some years, even maybe young adults who were educated at home. It's an idea. Anyway, it's a real problem that only people from national education are in charge of the control of children who don't learn with education system. I hope I've answered the questions.
Después de esta pregunta, quiero pasar